I'm Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian, and if it's Monday, I have my favorite segment of the week. Sorry, other folks. Pablo Torre. Pablo, welcome.
I won't tell anybody, Jen, how much you enjoyed doing this with me. It is a thrill to get to talk about, frankly, politics and sports in a way that I think has been long overdue. So happy to do it with you.
Absolutely. You know, they say culture is upstream of politics. Sports is too. So there you go. And sports is culture.
Oh, it's the biggest vector, the biggest monoculture we got left. Yeah, absolutely.
You wrote an incredible piece about the disappeared. Tell us about that, about the individual, about the issue, how you see it all.
Yeah, so we did a piece for my show, Pablo Torre Finds Out, called The Goalie Who Disappeared. And the reason I decided to invest months of time, budget, energy is because it just became clear to us and Paola Ramos, who's the correspondent we ended up working with on this story, that this is an athlete that the Trump administration does not want you to know about. He is a professional goalkeeper, was a professional goalkeeper in Venezuela, a youth coach, somebody with no criminal record, somebody who fled the dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro, was suffocated for protesting that regime, and sought asylum, political asylum through legal channels in the United States. Came to this country, registered on the app, the Customs and Border Patrol app, and did everything he was supposed to do to find, asylum, freedom, safety from America, only to then become one of the people who got disappeared to CICOT in El Salvador. And the reason he was sent there to yet another different dictatorship is because he had a tattoo. He had a soccer tattoo that was an homage to Real Madrid, his favorite team. And when I tell you that that is why he was sent there, that should be certainly of a piece with the larger pattern we've seen in terms of tattoos being alleged markers for Tren de Aragua, this horrific gang in Venezuela. It's also something that every expert who studied Tren de Aragua, to be very clear, says has absolutely nothing to do with Tren de Aragua. These specific sports tattoos, and this has been the Jumpman Air Jordan logo, this has been soccer balls with crowns on them, as was the case for Jersey Reyes Barrios, the goalie who disappeared in question. And it's also just true of tattoos, period. It's just not a thing for Tren de Aragua. So it's baffling, right? And the thing that is just so clear to me is that the reason they don't want you to know about him is because he has, to borrow a term from soccer, from goalkeeping, he has a clean sheet. The dude is beloved by the kids he coached, by the teammates he had, by the employers who he worked for in Venezuela. And Venezuela, by the way, Jen, you may recall, Maduro is no friend of Trump. And so the idea that he fled the autocrat who's an enemy of Trump only to wind up himself in the hands of what feels like an autocracy in the United States that sends him to a different autocracy in El Salvador is a stain upon the American project. And there is no spinning it. His family, the last detail I'll give you for now, is simply that his family has not heard from him since March. They don't know where he is, if he's okay. He's one of these people who is innocent, went through the legal channels of seeking asylum and refuge in our country, looking for freedom to find only the opposite. And it's horrific.
Has the sports community rallied to his cause? You know, there's domestic soccer here, there's international soccer, there's FIFA, for goodness sakes. What's going on in the sports community?
I'm really trying to get people to understand that this tattoo he has, right? In case you were just wondering, do I really believe these reporters and their journalism here? We found that this tattoo that he has, a soccer ball with a crown on it, is also on the leg, by the way, of Neymar. It's also on the leg of Dybala, these superstars. Like, in a sense, this is kind of like, as we say in the episode, a basketball with flames on it. It's not particularly even idiosyncratic. Like, the Real Madrid logo, you may recall, has a crown on a ball-shaped item, right? Like, so lots of people can have this tattoo. It's insane that this was a thing that got him sent to a maximum security terrorist gulag. And I wish that on some level, sports did rally around him because he is one of theirs. He really is.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he's currently quite literally fending for himself, and we have no idea if he's okay.
It's amazing. Well, soccer players have been loath to do what basketball players have done, which is literally wear their message on their sleeve. The league has organized various efforts here in the United States and elsewhere, but this seems like it is crying out for some kind of joint uniform effort. My goodness.
Jen, I always remind people when it comes to Kilmar Abrego Garcia or any other case like this, on some level, I want to make the argument, and of course we should, that, even the Boston bomber, even the worst terrorist, got due process because that's the rule of law in our country.
Right.
But I also know that we in America are perpetually in the story business. We're in the messenger business. We're in the who do we have empathy for business. And in Jersey Reyes Barrios and his family and his players, who are these kids that we talked to in Venezuela, you have the right protagonists to make political impact. And I just am trying to get the word out so people realize, insofar as we are a business of narrative, you got your protagonist right here.
Exactly.
And that's why they don't want you to know about them.
Exactly. And that's so interesting because on one hand, you do want to make the argument on behalf of everyone, because when Trump says, oh, they're only criminals, it's like, well, and that's why we have due process, because we want to determine whether they're criminals or not. But we all need a specific face, a specific person. It's hard to wrap your mind around even a few hundred Venezuelans.
Yes.
But they're not commodities. They're individuals. They have individual stories. They have individual families. And it is mind-blowing the degree to which the administration has demonized these people, erased their humanity. They don't refer to any of their names, their identities. This is what fascism looks like. This is the place that he came from. This is Venezuela.
The Trump administration has put America in the role of a dictatorship enabling other dictatorships. That is the daisy chain of custody that's happened here. And you're so right. I mean, look, when the Eagles visited the White House, Jen, they walked onto that lawn and they saw those signs. The alleged criminals, terrorists, and everything they were accused of, in a way that certainly evoked a third world dictatorship. And the only question I have when it comes to why would you show up when you see that there, when you know that this is the administration that does that, the only question I have is, do you have any deal breakers? Is there anything beyond the pale for you, or is this all so transactional in terms of celebrity, fame, influence, whatever, the good feeling of being celebrated at this historic institution? The question I have is, do you realize what that institution actually is right now? And that should be a deal breaker. But over and over again across sports, I find people unwilling to grapple with what reality is, even if it's reported vividly with audio and video in the case of our episode for everybody to see.
Well, we will definitely do our part to lift this up. I want to talk about someone in American sports who has always shown a sense of conscience, a sense of social responsibility, and that's Greg Popovich. He is the winningest basketball coach of all time. He is the longest serving basketball coach of all time, 29 years doing this, if you can believe it. And he retired following a mild stroke that he had. He will continue to be the president of the team. Talk to us a little bit about him and what he's meant to basketball and the obligation to speak out on issues of public importance.
Yeah. The goal, I think, of being a public figure, if you have a political conscience, is to become so clearly successful and important and accomplished that you just tell the truth. And Greg Popovich was somebody at every turn in these press conferences was ahead of the curve, pointing out systemic racism in America, being more radical when it came to the way he articulated the inequities, historical and contemporary, of the United States, was even more explicit than, I would say, many of the athletes who did their own very, I would say, brave and courageous protesting. Greg Popovich is on the record saying stuff with a level of articulation that, I would say, in his case, a former Air Force serviceman who studied, I believe, like Russia, might have a particular adroitness with. And that's on top of the fact that he was relentlessly adaptable. You know, like he transcended eras. He did whatever he needed on the court to adjust, whether that meant shooting threes when he hated shooting threes before, whether that meant recruiting globally, turning San Antonio, of all places, in a bit of a metaphor for what America could be internationally, into this shining city that welcomed players, foreign and domestic. You know, like it was so incredible what he built. And through it all, his lack of giving a bleep meant that he could criticize certainly Donald Trump in a way that everybody else, this side of Steve Kerr, who was, by the way, a member of Greg Popovich's coaching tree, was and remains too terrified to say aloud.
And there was something, because he looked like this in later years, this old grizzled guy, you know, with kind of a gruff voice that made it even more authentic. Because let's face it, Americans want people that look and sound like them. He wasn't some long, you know, what we used to call like a long-haired radical. He looked like a working class guy. So when he said these things, he had a level of credibility that politicians don't have, that many players don't have. It was really authentic. And, you know, you mentioned Steve Kerr, who is the other one who has followed that sense of conscience. You know, he is the son of an academic who was murdered in Beirut at American University, and has always been an advocate on guns, on society in many ways. Is he now really kind of the tradition, the leader of that tradition that Greg Popovich started? Is he kind of the guy now?
Yes, and they have different manners, right? So Popovich, for the record, like, could also often be a jerk. You know, he was like very hard to deal with. He was mean in press conferences, but all of that accrued to, I think, when I say before, right, we need the right messengers. That gruff coach with an unimpeachable coaching resume, who was from the military service academies, that guy also being the one who would, you know, sound the alarm on this administration back before Trump was who we know now. That's why that worked. Steve Kerr is a variation on that. Steve Kerr, and I think his late father Malcolm, who you referenced accurately, Steve Kerr is more of a diplomat. Steve Kerr, by the way, when you play the parlor game, Jen, of who from sports would you actually want to run for president? The answer is not Stephen A. The answer is not Mark Cuban. The answer is not fill in the blank athlete here. The answer is Steve Kerr.
Absolutely. There's no one else. No one else.
He's just so far and away the best candidate because he's always had a genuine intellect and empathy well beyond just being sports obsessed, which he is. He played with Michael Jordan, obviously, got punched by Michael Jordan. He won titles for Greg Popovich. He won titles as a coach of the modern dynasty of the Warriors. He has an unimpeachable resume as well. But the difference is, you know, and it's funny, as my alma mater came into the news a couple of weeks back, Steve Kerr came into a presser wearing a Harvard shirt because Harvard had done the thing. He had no affiliation directly, but Harvard had done the thing where they actually stood up to Trump. And Steve Kerr on gun control because of his dad, on issues of certainly foreign policy because of his global view of sports and his experience abroad, and then also his courage when it comes to picking the right fights. He's ready. I just think he might, as often is the case, he might be too sane. He might be too normal to want this, which is the real rub when it comes to
Right.
casting that job.
But it's funny, Republicans have cornered the market on stupid sports figures in office, like Tommy
It's true.
Tubberville. If there's
Oh
a
my
dumber
God.
man in the United States Senate and the competition is stiff, I don't know. Democrats never seem to have like the Steve Kerr running or, the articulate, empathetic, but really authentic guy. Can't they do some recruiting? Can't they like
I
bring these people
know.
up?
I feel like there's such an opening here because
Yeah.
also really helpful is just being a champion, being a
Yeah.
winner. And you know that because Trump has run on being a winner with no wins. He has run on being a jock with no actual, as we
Right.
always say on this show, without any real demonstrated knowledge of knowing ball.
None. None.
Tommy Tuberville was a deeply mediocre SEC football coach who won nothing. And he cosplays as the American man because he has not been challenged by someone like, let's say, Steve Kerr.
Yes.
So I think that's just a massive opening. And yeah, I also have that as an ongoing interest to
Yeah.
sound the alarm on we need our own answer to the Tommy
Exactly.
Tubervilles of the world.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, there's rumor that he may run for governor, which is bad news for his state, but, get him out of the Senate. And, Alabama voted for this guy, but Alabama have this guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. The more he just repeats these fake stories about recruiting Patrick Mahomes that Trump gloms onto, and then they're just like actively lying about verifiable sports trivia.
it's
It's just
unbelievable.
it's so flagrant that it indicates something even more offensive than exaggerating your resume. He's literally just making it up.
Exactly. Exactly. So, last topic for today, I want to talk about a perennial topic, actually, which is women and compensation in sports. We've got the start of the WNBA season starting up. There is still this, obviously, I can't think of a bigger disparity in pay between the NBA and the WNBA, but women's basketball is catching on. When does that gap begin to narrow, and why has it remained so big, even when you have stars who are, making
Yeah,
millions in, NIL money, for example?
right, right. The collective bargaining agreement of the WNBA is expiring in 2027. And so, look, what's about to happen here as we see the business of women's basketball really surge, and in college, NIL has been such a leading indicator of where attention can be turned into money.
Yeah.
Caitlin Clark has been a
Yeah.
revolutionary figure on the court, but also off the court, economically speaking. The ratings for WNBA games, the playoffs, yet another record being broken this past year. All of it indicates, and that's without Caitlin, all of it indicates that this is a stock you're going to want to own at its lowest possible value. And it's not enough to say that this is the least money the WNBA will have ever made, this current run from its inception in the 90s to today. It is also the case that the WNBA players, fascinatingly, all kind of know that. There are a lot of players who have timed their contracts to expire with this CBA. It's fascinating. We're about to enter a marketplace where for the first time, the WNBA, which had always been hiding underneath the NBA's larger framework, is actually going to be able to stand, it seems, on its own 2 feet and demand something that is more commensurate with their future value. Previously, the WNBA was essentially paid for by the NBA because the NBA wanted the league around, but they also knew that the business wasn't quite a real business, indicated by the $70,000 that you get if you're the number 1 overall pick. That's the annual salary for the top pick in the draft.
Yeah.
And now, Jen, as you've become aware, like there are off-season leagues. This unrivaled 3-on-3 league is now taking up the calendar in the off season and paying these players more than they ever were. I mean, they used to go to Russia, they used to go to China, they used to go to Turkey to get more money than the WNBA was paying them to play, because those oligarchs wanted them around as like these, again, they're trophies. They're trophies. They're exactly right. And now what you're just seeing is that this is not a social cause in America anymore. It is not a guilt trip anymore. It is just a real business. And that is kind of the capitalistic dream for a sport. Is you don't need to, appeal to someone's conscience to get them to want to shell out money. They just want to do it because the product is self-evidently so good.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest difference in the evolution of the WNBA. And we're going to see that as these next 2 years proceed here.
Exactly. And we're going to have to see whether they break off and negotiate their own broadcast rights, their own broadcast deals, instead of just getting like the crumbs from the NBA deals. So that's going to be fascinating, to watch. And that brings us to one of my favorite sports, which is tennis. We have just begun this series of clay court tournaments in Europe leading up to the French Open. And the Italian Open, which begins today, had promised last year we would equalize the salaries, the prize money for women and men. Didn't quite make it there. And there are a surprisingly large number of tournaments that haven't done it. The big four Grand Slams have, but there are other tournaments that have not. How do you explain that, given that there is no question that women's tennis is huge, that there are superstars, there are American stars, there are international stars? Why is it taking so long?
There are some major sports, not compared to the NFL, for instance, or the NBA, but when it comes to, let's say, tennis and soccer, where women's soccer and women's tennis, I think about as interesting analogs. These are sports where the women are oftentimes more popular draws than the male equivalents. And so, again, the through line here is, when does the market actually get to speak, and when is it inhibited by, I would say, the inherited bias of the hierarchy of men make more because, of course, the male athletes are better.
Exactly.
This is not a question of, if you were to put Serena Williams head to head against, Sinner, if you put him against Alcaraz, right? It's not who would win, it's who's watching, who is willing to buy tickets, who is more entertaining, right? And that's, look, it's so interesting right now because NIL, I keep on thinking about, because NIL has been this distillation in American college sports of the value of attention, right? And so too in women's tennis, I'm like, I don't know why, certainly, like the purses, the prize money is the way it is. I just know that if you were to redesign this stuff from scratch today on the open market, we would be so much closer when it comes to value as decided by the sheer greed and capitalism of our economy than it would be under just the working presumptions around, well, men are better athletes, aren't they?
Exactly.
It's like, that's not quite the same question. And so, look, you're a bigger tennis fan than me. I can't speak to what's happening in Italy as specifically as you can. I just know that we are seeing the gasps of an old economic order be disrupted by entrepreneurialism and new rules. And I think it's all happening faster than those institutions have been acting, frankly.
And just like women's soccer in America, if you look at the relative strength of men's tennis in America and women's tennis, there are many more women from America who are in the top 10 than there are men. You've got Taylor Fritz on one side, and on the other side, you have Coco and Madison Keys and Navarro and Pegula. You go down the list. So it's a long time coming. But as always, it is a delight to talk to you about more than sports, because really sports is about more than sports, right?
Yeah, sports to me has always been my excuse to do liberal arts. you know, like
There you go.
actually, it's the full course of the humanities that you get to engage in, as well as some economics. So thanks for letting me, you know, play on scholarship here, Jen, as it were. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. We will see you back next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.